It was my first year of university. I had just finished unpacking all of my stuff into my room, and my family had just left. Later on that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and right from the get-go, I knew this kid was the most socially inept person I'd ever met. I introduced myself as Dan, sticking out my arm for a handshake. He paused, looked down at my arm as if he didn't understand at first, then laughed and went, "Oh," and gave me an almost dead fish handshake. I had to ask him for his name since he didn't even tell me when we shook hands. He was Dale. I tried to make small talk, but he just answered my questions with yes or no's, occasionally awkwardly laughing or smiling. Within minutes, we were both just sitting on our beds, on our laptops, not talking to each other. I was upset and planned on requesting to be placed with a different roommate. Anyone would be better than Dale. I thought Dale was just a really awkward kid, but I soon learned he was much more than just that. I met some of the other kids on my floor and they seemed cool, so that was good. I came back to my dorm after looking around campus the first night to find Dale still in the same position he was in when I left. I said, "What's up, Dale?" and he didn't answer. Not to my surprise. It was 9:30, I didn't have anything to do, so I turned out the lamp on my side of the room and went to bed. I didn't actually fall asleep anytime soon though. Dale was on his laptop until 3 in the morning. When he finally closed his laptop, I fell asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up within the hour. The blinds to our room had been opened, and the moonlight now creeping into the room made everything visible, including Dale sitting on the side of his bed, looking at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Dale, what the hell are you doing?" He whispered back, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning, I woke up to find Dale had already gotten up. I felt like it was the first time he left the room. It was a Saturday, the first Saturday of the year, meaning orientation and all the campus festivities. During the orientation, as my group was walking by the school gardens, I heard a couple of students ahead of me saying, "What is that kid doing in there?" I saw who they were talking about. It was Dale, literally sitting in the dirt behind a patch of bushes, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise I'm sure she would have said something. I just walked by not saying anything, eventually telling the 2 kids I overheard that he was my roommate as a way to start a conversation and maybe make some friends. They apologized for me. None of us really knew if it was appropriate to laugh or not, but we did. I made friends with those 2 kids, and we made plans to get together that night. I also learned when I got back to my dorm that the school found another roommate for me. Things seemed to be turning around quickly for the better. I left the room that night to go meet up with the 2 kids I met, and when I got back, Dale was sitting on the desk chair facing the door. I said, "Oh, hey, what's up?" He said nothing, very matter-of-factly. I sat down on my bed and opened my laptop, and realized I forgot to lock it. I also realized that all of my emails had been opened. Emails I was pretty sure I didn't even read, and a bunch of folders of mine had been opened. Dale must have snooped through my laptop. When I asked him if he did, he responded no very loudly, half a second after I even finished my question. I could read him like a book. This creepy kid was literally going through my computer when I was out. I knew he did it, but I didn't pursue it. I was ready to go to bed, so as I went into my bed to look for my pajamas, I felt like my clothing had all been moved around as well. I knew I'd be out of there forever by tomorrow, so I didn't say anything. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a zipper. I sat up and saw Dale on the ground, going through my bag. I turned the lamp on, this time confronting him about it. He played dumb, saying, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." It was the closest thing to wits that he'd shown up until that point. Still, I knew he was lying, and I knew something was wrong with him, so I couldn't get physical with him. The next day, I met my new roommate in the same building, and everything went well. Sunday night, after having a decent conversation with my roommate, who was no social butterfly, but was miles better than Dale, we both turned off our lights and went to bed. For the 3rd night in a row, I woke up at some off hour of the night to a strange noise. It was a weird clicking noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least twice every 30 seconds. I got up, hoping to find something innocent, like a heavy bag putting pressure on a weak floorboard, or even a mouse. But as I scoped out the room, I realized the sound was actually coming from the other side of the door. The nightlight in the common area was always on, so when I looked through the peephole, I was able to see the scalp of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking down, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying attention, I realized the tiny clicking noises were actually coming from the doorknob. I was sure the person was trying to unlock the door. I dialed the number for the campus police department, and they showed up in under 5 minutes to the common room, and only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers to have Dale in cuffs. I had a feeling it was him. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate who was going through my stuff, so I switched dorms, only to find him trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I never saw him again. He either got suspended for the semester or expelled. I got through the rest of my years at university like anybody else. However, the nightmarish experience I had with Dale still pops up in my head every now and then. I went to Binghamton University for 2 years. I quickly made a big group of friends there, and we'd go out every weekend. One weekend on a Friday night in October, when my group didn't have any big plans together, me and 2 other close friends decided to hang out in the school nature preserve by the lake. There was this little clearing on the far side of the lake that was convenient for fires. Since it was so far from view of the school or campus security, kids would sometimes, but not often, come here to smoke pot, drink, and do basically all the other drugs. It was a relatively unknown spot on campus by most, and we liked that about it. Tonight we just brought a bunch of beers, lit a fire, and hung out, having what we referred to at the time as a bro chat. As the night progressed, time seemed to pass quicker as the alcohol began to take effect. Eventually it got to the point where we were all laughing so hard that one of my 2 friends was on the floor rolling in the leaves. That was when my other friend stopped laughing and went, "Shh." We all perked up and listened, and heard the crunching of leaves and branches in the distance. We threw our bottles in the lake since we were all under 21, and it wasn't unheard of for campus police to come through the woods on weekends to catch kids doing drugs. We tucked the rest of the beers into a backpack. I was moderately drunk, so my paranoia was higher than usual. That was probably the case for all of us. The fire exposed us to anyone passing through the woods. But the thing is, this spot was so unknown and far from campus that it was rare to find anybody else that deep into the woods. It sounded like just one person in the distance. The sound of a tree branch snapping not too far away freaked all of us out. None of us were really the confrontational ones from our group, so we were lacking that one person who would have the confidence to stand up and yell out to whoever was out there. Instead, we all just sat in silence, shushing each other. We heard what seemed to be somebody or something circling us, or at least walking around in a C shape around our little campsite. It literally started to feel like we were in the movie The Blair Witch Project, because these sounds in the near distance, like cracking tree branches and leaves crunching on the ground, kept echoing over to our campsite. We laughed about it at first, but I personally soon became terrified of who or what it could be. Out of the blue, a huge thud made all 3 of us jump. At first I didn't understand, even though I saw what caused the sound. It took me a few seconds to digest the fact that a branch had been thrown into the center of our little fire site. One of my 2 friends took off running, while my other friend and I sat behind, looking at each other, half laughing, half concerned. I feel like we didn't know yet if this was some kind of joke or not. Then, my friend let out a scream of pain as he was struck in the face by another tree branch. I grabbed the backpack, helped my friend up off the floor, and we hauled ass back in the direction of our dorm. When we made it to the road separating the nature preserve from our dorm, we stopped to catch our breath. But whoever was out there proved to be following us when we heard footsteps coming closer to the road. We continued to run back to the dorm, and when we got back to our floor, we found our other friend in his room already. We looked out of his room window down to the woods. There was someone pacing back and forth by the woods, and every time a car passed, they would walk back into the woods. Eventually, whoever it was went back into the woods for good, to never be seen again by us. we continued our drinking session in the dorm room, and within 10 minutes we were all laughing about it. It wasn't until the next morning that we all realized how terrifying that experience actually was. We never really went back into the woods past dark after that. This takes place during the first week of school, my freshman year at the University of Iowa. I was just starting to get comfortable with my roommate. He was dedicated to the idea of rushing a fraternity, and rush week was starting the next week, but the parties were starting Thursday of the first week. My roommate didn't want to go alone because it would be harder to meet people that way, so he wanted me to go. I happily agreed to go with him. Even though I had no interest in rushing a fraternity, I still had intentions to go to parties. After all, I was attending a party school. My roommate wanted to go to one frat party on Thursday, and then parties at different frat houses on Friday and Saturday. On this Thursday night, we were headed to perhaps one of the lowest ranked frats. I'm pretty sure it was an underground one too. But his logic in attending was to have a backup frat in case the higher ones wouldn't give him a bid. The frat house was really far from campus in a much more slummy downtown area. We pulled up to a corner house, and if it weren't for the blasting music and cars parked everywhere, we would never picture this house as a frat house. It literally looked like they settled with the first house they found. We knocked on the door to immediately be greeted by some short, chubby guy in a white t-shirt holding a Solo cup. His shirt had sweat stains by his armpits and mid-belly area. He told us to come right in. The party itself was in a horribly dimly lit room with probably 50 guys bunched up into the living room. It was hot as hell in there to make it even worse. I think I saw maybe 2 girls at the entire party, neither of them even close to attractive. I gave the party a good 20 minutes, talking with one overweight foreigner after another, all giving off antisocial vibes. Eventually I waved for my roommate to get ready to leave, but a huge group of guys by the door made us decide to wait a little longer to avoid the awkwardness of leaving early. I continued to drink the cheap beers they were serving. I think I downed 5 cups before I could even feel the buzz. A heavy guy approached me with a tiny bottle in his hand and handed it to me, smirking and saying, "That'll get you shit-faced." I fake laughed and thanked him, expecting him to go away, but he just watched me as if he were waiting for me to drink it. So I did. It was maybe 2 shots worth of some kind of hard liquor. The guy then started making conversation with me, and every time I hinted that I was trying to get away, he would try to pull me further into this otherwise one-sided conversation. Things started to get really blurry pretty soon. I remember feeling dizzy all of a sudden, and the room seemed to be getting darker. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in a dark room, laying in a bed. I could hear the sound of music muffled behind closed doors, so I knew I was still in the frat house. It was a very dark room, however I could still make out certain furniture in the room, and a small closet door, not much else though. But even over the blaring music, I heard the sound of a plastic bag being crunched from the closet, as if somebody had stepped on it by mistake. I ran out of that room and down the stairs back to the overcrowded living room. I found my roommate and pushed him out the front door, past the group of guys still standing in a circle right next to it. During the car ride back to campus, I told my roommate I was drugged. He almost called the cops, but I said it would be foolish and pointless. My roommate then asked me an awkward question. Was I taken advantage of? I didn't feel any type of pain, and my clothes were all still on the same, so I assumed not. When I did a time check, I realized I'd only been out for maybe 10 minutes before waking up. Whatever the guy gave me must have been a dud or something, thank God. That was my college experience of attending an underground ghetto frat party, and it remains to be my scariest life experience. I had a single dorm my first semester of sophomore year. It was in the corner of the floor, kind of secluded from the rest of the dorm rooms, since it was in its own little section. You had to turn a corner to even see the door. It was nice because I'd be able to still talk with friends on my floor, invite people over to my room, and still have privacy when it was time to do homework or go to sleep. A few weeks into the semester, while studying for a bio exam, the silence was interrupted by a noise. It took me a bit to realize it was a light tapping on the door. It was so light that I almost didn't even hear it. I yelled, "Come in," but the door didn't open, so I got up to open it. Nobody was there. I walked around the corner to look down the hall. Nobody. Somebody was obviously messing with me. I went back to my bed and continued studying, this time leaving the door open. Nobody came back. The next night, a few minutes after shutting the lamp in my bedroom to go to bed, the tapping on the door returned, only this time it was much louder, more of a knocking sound. I called out, "Who is it?" and again the knocking stopped and nobody answered. I got out of my bed quickly and opened the door to see my small private corridor was void of any people. Again, I ran the 10 feet from my door to the corner to look down the main hallway of the floor. Nobody. The next morning, I asked some of the other kids in the dorm if they had been messing with me. Everyone said no. The next night, I woke up after having been asleep for 3 hours. Someone was knocking on my door again, this time louder than ever. I had trouble deciding whether to open the door or not this time. With a bout of courage, I hopped up and opened the door. Nobody was there as I was expecting, but this time I full-on sprinted down the tiny corridor isolating my room, and when I turned the corner, I saw the back of somebody disappearing behind the far corner on the opposite side of the hallway. I ran as fast as I could down the hallway, and as I turned to the next hallway where I saw the person a few seconds earlier, I saw a door at the end of the hallway shutting. It wasn't a dorm room, it was a bathroom. I felt like I was ready to confront whoever the stall opened. I was confused. There were the boots sitting on the floor, but no person to wear them. And then I heard a creepy giggling noise. Not a feminine or childlike one. It was a kind of laughing that I could only imagine to be that of a really old crazy man. For some reason my confidence was gone and I was scared shitless. Therefore, I ran back to my room and shut the door. I hopped back in my bed and started texting every friend I had. Of course, everybody was asleep though. The knocking happened one more time that night.
The Watchers in the Ozark Forest. Living near the Ozark Mountains has offered me great opportunities to go camping deep in the secluded forest every weekend. It's always been my hobby, something I've done every month since I was in high school. Over the years, I honed my skills, camping at areas that most would consider too wild or too dangerous. The more secluded, the better. That's what led me here, following an old, barely visible trail that I found on a map far from the usual campsite. This time, I wanted complete solitude, a place where the only sounds would be the wind in the trees and the crackle of my campfire. The journey to my camping spot was arduous, with the trail winding through thick undergrowth and across rocky outcrops. But I persisted, each step taking me deeper into the heart of the forest, further from the world of man. My destination was a clearing near a small stream where I had hoped to find the tranquility I was seeking. As I trudged along the trail, I came across a dense thicket, far denser than the rest of the forest I had traveled through. It was dark and cold, with thick foliage completely blocking out the sun. Though it was just midday, the spot made me feel as if night had already fallen. A growing sense of unease crept into my heart as I pressed on through the dark forest. It wasn't the usual feeling of being alone in the wilderness. This was something different, a nagging sense that I wasn't alone as I'd thought. I warily looked at the overlapping branches around me, each as thick as an average tree trunk. That's when I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There, high in the branches of an enormous gnarled tree, was a tattered tent. It looked ancient. Its fabric was ripped and weathered by years of exposure. The way it was positioned, rigged up in the branches like some kind of makeshift treehouse, suggested that someone had once lived there, perhaps to stay off the ground for safety. The sight of the tent was unsettling, but it was in such a state of disrepair that I doubted anyone had used it in years. I decided to move on, telling myself it was just an old relic of some long-forgotten camper. When I reached my intended camping spot, the clearing was exactly as I had imagined, peaceful, secluded, with just enough space for my tent and a fire pit. I quickly set up camp, had a sandwich to restore my strength, and then wandered around to gather firewood. The sun was dipping low on the horizon by the time I had returned. My campfire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool night air. I sat close, staring into the flames as they danced and flickered. The warmth quickly chased away the weariness of a long day of hiking. I laid back and enjoyed the nighttime sounds of the forest. However, my tranquility did not last. Behind me came the sound of rustling footsteps, faint but unmistakable. The sound originated just beyond the edge of the clearing. I froze, listening intently, but hearing nothing. It seemed whoever or whatever was out there knew I was aware of it. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice loud and stern. Silence. The forest around me remained eerily quiet, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. I strained my ears, trying to catch any hint of movement, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything, just the oppressive silence and the darkness pressing in on all sides. After a long wait without a response, I shook off the feeling, assuming it was just an animal, a deer perhaps, or a fox. I had been alone in the woods plenty of times before, and I knew how easy it was for the mind to start seeing and hearing things that weren't really there. But as I sat back down by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there were eyes hidden in the darkness, following my every move. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the depths of the forest. I stared for a brief moment, but quickly pulled it back when I saw nothing worth worrying about. Suddenly, the branches above me crackled, and I felt eyes gnawing at me, more intense than ever. I looked up, my eyes scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of what might be out there. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the shadows cast by the flickering flames playing tricks on my mind. But as I stared harder, I realized that the shadows were moving, dark figures lurking among the trees, just beyond the reach of the firelight. They were barely visible, their forms blending with the darkness. But they were there, watching me from the branches above. It was too dark for me to discern what I was seeing, but I didn't dare use my flashlight again. The figures were indistinct, almost formless, but something about the way they moved, the way they seemed to hover in the trees, filled me with a deep, primal fear. I wanted to believe that it was just my imagination, and that the shadows were nothing more than the result of an overactive mind at the campfire. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This figure, whatever it was real, and it had been watching me for some time. The fear became unbearable, a cold, clammy dread that settled into my bones. I had to get out of there. Quickly, I began packing up my gear, breaking down my tent, and extinguishing the fire. The figures remained, unmoving, their eyes fixed on me as I worked, their presence a constant weight on my shoulders. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee the forest as fast as I could, but I forced myself to move cautiously, not wanting to provoke whatever was out there. After quickly packing my gear, I began the long trek back through the forest. I deliberately chose a different trail to avoid the dense area with the tattered tent. Something in my gut told me the tent was related to the creatures I'd seen in the branches. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but it did little to chase away the feeling of being watched, of someone lurking just beyond the edge of the light. The sound of cracking branches returned, following me through the woods, always just out of sight. They were closer now and louder. Whatever was stalking me seemed to be growing bolder. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I navigated the treacherous terrain. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches swaying eerily as dark figures leapt from branch to branch high above, their movements almost too fast to track. I didn't dare look up, afraid of what I might see. At last I emerged from the edge of the forest. The trees gave way to the open clearing where I had parked my car. As I reached my vehicle, I glanced back at the forest. High in the foliage, the figures kept stalking me. It perched like some hellish bird of prey. Its body blended with the shadows, but its eyes, those bright, white eyes, stood out in stark contrast, glowing in the darkness. It didn't follow me out of the forest, but I knew it had been watching me the entire time. Even as I fumbled with my keys in the parking lot, I could feel its gaze burning into the back of my neck. I fled in the middle of the night, driving away as fast as I could. Questions raced through my mind on the way back, but none of those had any proper answers. Back at home, I shared the story with a few close friends, but none of them believed me. They laughed it off, dismissing it as nothing more than a campfire tale, a story spun by a man who had spent too much time camping alone in the woods. But I knew the truth. I knew what I had seen, and I knew that I would never venture into those deep, dark woods alone again. The night I heard footsteps. Camping is my escape. Every weekend, I pack up my gear, grab my dog, Billy, and head out into the wilderness. It's a ritual, really. Just me, Billy, and the endless stretch of trees that feels like a second home. Over the years, I learned the rules of the woods, the do's and don'ts of surviving out here. I've also heard all the stories, the strange noises, the whispers in the wind, and the eerie cries that seem to come from nowhere. But honestly, they don't bother me. If anything, they're part of the charm. The forest has its quirks, and I've gotten used to them. That's not to say I'm reckless. I know that out here anything can happen. Ghosts, creatures, whatever you want to call them. If they want to find you, they will. That's why I always bring a rifle and a knife. Just in case. But mostly I'm here for the peace and the solitude, and yeah, maybe a little thrill now and then. I've even started filming my trips, sharing them with friends who get a kick out of my little adventures. It's all in good fun, until it isn't. This particular trip was to Mount Greylock, a place I'd visited a few times before. It's one of those spots where you can go deep enough into the woods to lose the world behind, but not so far that you're completely isolated. As Billy and I pulled up to the parking area, I noticed another car there, an old sedan with a bunch of bumper stickers plastered on the back. Out of it popped 3 girls, probably in their early 20s, all smiles and chatter. They had that kind of energy that made you feel tired just watching them. We exchanged polite nods as we all geared up to head out into the forest. They seemed a little out of place, but hey, everyone starts somewhere. I figured they'd probably stick close to the main trails, maybe set up camp near the lake like most first-timers do. As Billy and I made our way deeper into the woods, I could still hear them laughing and talking, their voices carrying through the trees. Part of me wondered if they knew what they were getting into, but I shrugged it off. It wasn't my business, and I had my own camp to set up. By the time I'd set up my tent and got a fire going, the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains. The lake near my campsite was calm, the kind of serene that makes you forget the world for a while. I could see the girls had set up their tent on the opposite side of the lake, close enough that their voices still carried over the water. They were loud. Too loud for my liking, but I figured they'd quiet down once night fell. I busied myself with cooking dinner, Billy lying contentedly by the fire. As darkness fully settled in, the girls seemed to get even more animated. I could hear them cracking open beers and telling spooky stories, the kind you would expect at a campfire. The stories themselves didn't bother me, but the volume was something else. I tried to tune them out, focusing on the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle in the trees. Still, their voices pierced the night, an unwelcome reminder that I wasn't alone as I usually prefer to be. It was nearing 11 p.m. when the first sign of unease crept in. Amid their laughter, I heard a sharp yipping sound from the dense forest. A coyote, nothing more, but it was enough to bring their chatter to a halt. I imagined the fear on their faces, the sudden realization that they weren't in control out here. Shortly after, their voices hushed, and I saw the flicker of their tent's zipper as they retreated inside. I let out a sigh of relief, the quiet finally descending over the campsite. The rain started not long after, a light drizzle that patted against the leaves in the top of my tent. It was the perfect backdrop for sleep, and with Billy curled up beside me, I settled in for the night. But peace did not last long. Around 1 a.m. I was jolted awake by a sound, a slow, deliberate crunching on the wet ground. Someone or something was walking outside. My heart thudded in my chest as I lay there, ears straining to catch every sound. The footsteps were cautious, too slow to be human, or at least to be a human who wasn't trying to be noticed. The rain had stopped, making every step louder, more distinct. But they weren't coming toward me. They were headed toward the girls' tent. I held my breath, listening as the sound grew fainter, then stopped altogether. Maybe it was one of them, just going out for a late-night bathroom break. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't want to know. After a few tense minutes, the woods went silent again. The exhaustion pulled me back under. Whatever had been out there, it didn't seem interested in me. And with that thought, I drifted back to sleep, hoping the morning light would chase away whatever shadows had crept into the night. I woke up early, as I usually do when I'm out in the woods. Just as the first light started to filter through the trees, it was around 5 a.m., and the air was crisp and cool, the kind that makes you feel alive. I had plans to take Billy for a walk deeper into the woods before packing up, but something immediately felt off. Across the lake, the girl's tent was unzipped, wide open, flaps swaying slightly in the morning breeze. But there was no movement, no sound, just an eerie stillness. I chuckled to myself at first, thinking they must be up already, exploring or getting an early start on the day. But then Billy started acting strange. He rooted himself to the spot, ears perked up, and let out a low, rumbling growl. It was a sound I'd heard before, the kind that signaled something was wrong. I called out to the girls, my voice echoing slightly across the lake. "Hey, you guys up?" But there was no response, not even a stir from inside the tent. That's when the first sliver of worry began to take hold. Billy refused to move, his growl growling more intense. His eyes locked on the other side of the lake. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the unease settling in my gut. Slowly I made my way around the lake, Billy reluctantly following at my side, his gaze never leaving that tent. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling of dread became. As I neared their campsite, the smell hit me first, a sharp, metallic scent that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Blood. Billy's barking turned frantic, his growls deepening into something more feral. My stomach churned as I reached the tent. The sight before me confirmed every fear that had been creeping in since the moment I woke up. Blood stained the ground outside the tent, a dark, ominous red that seemed to seep into the earth itself. The tent's interior was a mess. Ripped sleeping bags, scattered belongings, but no sign of the girls. It was as if they had simply vanished, leaving nothing but chaos and that sickening smell behind. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it, but there was only one thing I knew for sure. Something had gone horribly wrong. I immediately reached for my phone and dialed the police, my hands trembling slightly as I described the scene. It wasn't long before they arrived, but the entire time I stood there, the weight of the forest pressing down on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened wasn't over, and I wasn't sure if I was next. The cops showed up pretty fast. They told me to stay back while they checked out the girls' tent. Billy was still on edge, growling low as I stood there, trying to piece together what had happened. I explained everything, how I had heard footsteps in the night and found the tent open with no sign of the girls. I could tell they were eyeing me suspiciously, probably because of my rifle and how close my tent was to theirs. Thankfully, I had my camera with me. It wasn't much, but it had been recording on and off throughout the night, capturing bits of my routine and the occasional sound from the woods. After reviewing the footage, the officers seemed satisfied that I wasn't involved, but they warned me to stay available for any further questions. As I packed up, the forest felt different, heavy with the weight of what had happened. The girls were still missing, their fate unknown, and the woods seemed to hold on to the secrets of that night. Even now, as I recount this, the unease lingers. The forest, once my refuge, is now a reminder that not all who venture into the depths return. The Hunt. My name is Ethan, and I'm a 40-year-old biologist and wildlife photographer. Over the years, my work has taken me deep into the wilderness, where I've spent more time among nature's creatures than with people. To be honest, I feel more at home in the wild than in civilization with others. Camping in remote, rugged places isn't just part of my job, it's a hobby I do in my spare time. The challenges and solitude have always been my closest companions, but nothing would have prepared me for what I encountered on my latest trip to Olympic National Park in Washington. In early September of last year, I heard reports and rumors about a strange elk. People spoke of an oversized creature much larger than a moose, wandering deep within the forest of Olympic National Park. Compelled by the words of locals and park rangers, I planned a camping trip to the area. My mission was clear: to verify the existence of this mysterious animal, and, if it was real, I wanted to capture it with my camera. It was only 7 a.m. when I found myself deep in the heart of the park, surrounded by nothing but dense forest. The first day passed uneventfully, with me exploring the forest and familiarizing myself with the terrain. After a long day of hiking, I found a clearing near a spring to set up camp. The sun had dipped low behind the thick forest, leaving my surroundings dimly lit but still bright enough to complete my tasks. I had just started the fire when I heard it, a gunshot echoing in the distance. The sharp, unexpected sound was completely out of place in the stillness of the forest. Hunting was strictly prohibited in the park. and the sound of someone firing a gun here sent a chill down my spine. Then another shot rang out, closer this time. A creeping unease settled over me, a gnawing fear that something was terribly wrong. Then came the sounds of a chase, a frantic rustling of leaves, hurried footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Whoever it was, they were closing in on my campsite. Without hesitation, I extinguished the fire and abandoned my camp. I slipped into the dense brush nearby, hoping to remain unseen. It was best I avoid this hunting group. These men were armed, and who knows what they might do if they realized their illegal deed had a witness. I watched in silence, hidden and breathless. A large deer suddenly leapt out of the brush, far to the left of where I had hid. It was badly wounded. Thick red blood oozed from its torn flesh, staining the earth with an obnoxious color. The deer stumbled on my camping spot, trying to escape, but eventually collapsing onto the ashes that had once been my campfire. Just seconds later, the hunters appeared. A group of men in their 30s, their faces hardened with intent. They raised their rifle, cheering as they discovered the prey had finally fallen, lifeless on the ground. The sight was horrifying, but my instincts took over. I grabbed my camera, quickly focusing on the lens of the hunters and the dead deer. I needed proof of this illegal act, evidence to bring to the authorities. The hunters were already wary of my tent, and I knew I had to act fast. In my haste, I forgot to turn off the flash. The light flickered, and the fear tightened around my throat. One of the hunters spotted me, his eyes narrowing in anger and alarm. In an instant, their attention shifted from the deer to me. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran, plunging deeper into the forest. I could hear them behind me, their shouts mingling with the pounding of my own footsteps. The hunt had taken a deadly turn, and I was now the prey. I ran as fast as I could, the forest blurring around me, knowing I couldn't outrun them. I scrambled up the nearest massive tree. I climbed higher and higher until the branches completely enveloped me. I tried to control my raging breathing, holding my breath as I waited for the inevitable. God had mercy. The tree had stopped swaying just as the hunters arrived below. High above the forest floor, I nestled among the branches, hoping the hunters would lose my trail and leave. I could see their movements frantic as they searched the area. My breath was shallow, my body tense, and every sound amplified in the silence that had fallen over the woods. Then, something strange happened. A gunshot again, and one of the hunters blasted out his gun. He stood beyond my view, so initially I had no idea what was happening. Why did he change the target? The hunters within my sight were frozen and visibly shaken, but soon they raised their rifles and fired. The shots rang out, one after another, but their bullets seemed to have no effect as the whole hunting group had to draw back from something. Suddenly the hunters stopped firing, their movements frozen by an unforeseen force. Then, looking down from the thick foliage, I saw it. The creature from the rumors. The elk's form was massive, as large as a bear, perhaps even bigger. Its antlers were enormous, twice the size of its head, with points branching thickly from the main beam, forming a dense shield that seemed impervious to bullets. Under the dim light, its presence was deeply unsettling, as if it didn't belong to this world. What happened next went beyond what any mortal could fathom. The elk, with a sudden fluid motion, rose up on its hind legs, towering over the men. It let out a sound, a loud hissing noise that sliced through the air like a blade. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, vibrating deep within my bones. The hunters clutched their ears, their faces twisted in pain, but there was no escape from the sound. It was as if the very air had turned against them. I too was affected. My vision blurred, and before I could react, I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness. When I finally awoke, the forest was silent. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. I was alone. The hunters, the strange elk, they were gone, as if they had never existed. The only evidence of the nightmare was the scattered rifles on the ground below, discarded like toys. I climbed down from the tree, my limbs stiff and sore. Disorientation overwhelmed me as I slowly approached my campsite. To my relief, everything remained untouched, seemingly unaffected by the night's horror. Even the dead deer still lay where it had fallen, right at my camping spot. I tried to piece together what had happened, but the memories were fragmented and surreal. The deer, the hunters, the sound, all of it felt like a twisted dream, but the evidence was undeniable. I gathered my belongings along with the rifles, but as I packed up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking beyond the tree line. Later on that same day, I reported the incident to the authorities. I showed them the photos, the evidence of the hunters, and told them about the strange elk. They listened, but when they conducted a search, there was nothing. There was no sign of the hunters, no trace of the enormous elk. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The authorities dismissed my story, attributing it to stress or perhaps a hallucination brought on by isolation, but I knew what I had seen. The reality of it haunted me, a truth that I couldn't escape, even as those around me refused to believe. I continued my work, but with a new caution and a respect for the unknown forces that I had once eagerly pursued. Every time I set foot in the wild, I carried a memory of that day with me, a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored.